Craig, thank you so much for being a guest on my podcast, Psyche. I'm super excited that we're finally connecting. I know, right? Before we hit record, we were talking about that we've been trying to get together for a while, but there's just been some things that have happened in terms of our schedule. And yeah, I'm just super happy to finally make this connection and have this conversation with you.
Well, I'm happy to be here. Yeah, we've been trying to connect for months now. I think it was May.
I think it was back in May.
I was on Acid Inner Experience, I think, and you reached out.
Yes. No, I saw that you got interviewed, and I love that conversation. And I thought, oh man, a fellow therapist that's also interested in philosophy. I got to connect with this guy, and I've just really enjoyed following you on Twitter as well, or I guess it's called X now. I'm still confused.
Yeah, I ignore that part.
There you go. Well, before we just kind of have like a conversation together about different ideas, would you mind, for the sake of the listeners, just introducing yourself, maybe talking a little bit about kind of who you are and what you do in terms of your profession, and then from there we can like launch into a conversation.
Sounds good. All right, so my name is Chuck, and I am a therapist in Ontario, Canada, all the way up in Canada. And I'm also the host of a podcast, Couch to Couch, Making Therapy Make Sense with Chuck LeBlanc. So I've been a therapist for about 3 years. I have a master's in philosophy and then a master's in counseling and psychology, and they kind of led to one another. And so what I do, I specialize in male mental health. And we deal with, the full range, but it's anxiety, grief, everything under the sun, really. Because we're dealing, as you know, when you're dealing with male mental health, you're dealing with all of it.
Yeah, totally.
And the typical stuff that comes in surrounds anxiety, grief, depression, transition, that sort of life transitions, that kind of stuff. But in my practice, I'm more influenced by the philosophy, the intersection between philosophy and psychology, than I am directly just like the psychological training I received.
Yeah, same here.
And that was one of the reasons I was like pumped to meet you, because it's very rare that you meet another psychotherapist with the same interests.
No, I agree.
So I'm pumped to see how our intersections kind of meet today. So that's a little bit about me. While I was doing my master's in psychology or counseling psychology, it's kind of funny to say, but I was a bit bored of the material. And so what I ended up doing was picking up old notebooks from my original master's, and I was looking for names of people that I knew my professors had talked about, but I'd never studied. One of which was Whitehead, the other was Deleuze. And so it kind of led me into studying Whitehead at first, then Deleuze, which kind of opened up the entire world at the same time. It wasn't something I planned, but I had no idea I was going to be looking at a thinker who kind of went after, like he was part of the anti-psychology movement and kind of did all that amazing things. So it's kind of a cool way to bridge my philosophy of life back into the world. And then it just took off from there. So that's kind of how I practice.
Yeah, dude, that's awesome. And I can't wait to kind of get into some of that. I guess maybe if I'm just like feeling led in terms of where I want to go, like I'm just curious, and I tend to do this with most of my guests. Can you talk a little bit about like your upbringing? And what I'm really curious about for so many people, obviously you as well, is what were some of the foundational like values, or some people go into like religion or spirituality, or just kind of their nationality. Like what were some of the things that you were kind of surrounded by that maybe shaped who you are now, like, and even got you into philosophy and psychology?
Yeah, so that's kind of a funny one. So, I mean, if we go to spirituality, I grew up Catholic. And so I've had some boxing bouts with my faith over the years, and kind of gone back and forth.
Sure.
But I grew up Catholic, and the way my family was, like I grew up in like a low income housing. So it was a very like, I guess you can say like poor area, poor family, but we didn't kind of know that until we were teenagers. My parents were extremely good at hiding that kind of stuff.
I had the same experience.
And so we kind of grew up in there. And so my parents and my family are very like blue collar people. So hands-on trades type people. And it's something that I was never very good at. So the getting into the trades, other than plumbing, for some reason, I'm very good at plumbing, which I can't even account for that. Maybe it's because I grew up with, Super Mario. I don't really know why.
Yeah, dude. Did you see the new movie?
Not yet.
But okay, it's actually really good.
Is it? Awesome.
Yeah.
I know all the songs off by heart.
Yeah. Wait, Wait till your young, well, wait till your daughter gets older and gets into it. You'll be fucking playing that shit on repeat, over and over again.
Yeah, I mean that's yeah. I can't wait for it because like that's our morning routine. Like we'll sit there. She goes in the chair, and then like I'll feed her, and then we put the music on, and then I'll sing like anything from stuff from Bluey to like Miss Rachel, like all of these you can imagine. And she's only like 14 months, so she has no idea what's going on, but she loves it. So whatever.
That's awesome.
But yeah, so the origin story. So I grew up in that kind of environment. I'm also neurodivergent. I have ADHD, so that kind of affected my educational experience growing up.
Sure.
I wasn't really big.
Were you diagnosed early on?
When I was a kid, obviously I didn't know this, but this is something that was told to me later on. My mom kind of through a resource at the school. They kind of figured it out. And then we worked with the resource teachers, and my mom was very good at trying to figure out. Her stance was, how do we work with the brain that you have? And how do we make it work? And I mean, years later, she became like a teaching assistant. She's been doing that for 25 years. So it makes sense that she would go this route. But so diagnosed when I was a kid through the school. And then I was re-diagnosed when I was 21 before I went to university because my education experience was horrific. I always joke that the only reason they graduated me in high school is because I was such a nice guy, because my marks were awful. And then when I went to university, that kind of changed. I originally went to university on a bet with a girlfriend at the time. I didn't think I'd get in, didn't think anything of it. I got in on a technicality because I was a mature student. And then I was like, well, shit, I have to try this. I didn't expect to be in there for longer than the first semester, but my very first class was philosophy with a professor, Dr. Mark Nievold, who is he was so passionate about what he was teaching that it was kind of like stand-up comedy. And as someone with ADHD and just the kind of person I am, I like live on the spectacle. Spectacle and challenge is kind of how I navigate the world. And so there was something about how he was talking about this shit that I was like, I don't have any idea what you're saying. Half of it sounds really weird, but there has to be something to it because you're so happy about it. And that's really what did it from that point on.
I want what he has.
That's right. I don't know what you were drinking. I don't know what you're smoking, but give it over because I want in.
That's awesome.
So, from a platonics perspective, he definitely corrupted the youth on that one. And that kind of took me through to my master's. So from a mental health perspective, or like a human development perspective, I guess you can say, I started to get interested in like how people work. So this would inevitably lead me to become the therapist.
Sure.
In and around when I was 14, so I had an experience of like suicidal ideation planning because of a very depressed period of my time. I was bullied for most of my youth. And then I had an experience which kind of changed all that. So I had like a plan. I knew exactly what was going to happen, a date. And then I went to a talent show with a best friend. We were going to apply to the talent show, and we did not get in because we were just basically Tenacious D before it was cool. And I met someone there who, and it would be like a decade before I figured out the impact, but by simply just meeting someone, the way they interacted with me kind of like blew me away. And I remember like meeting them, and I couldn't really speak, and I had to like walk away, and I remember like crying in a bathroom, just so overtaken.
Wow.
Which immediately changed my mind.
Was it a peer or an adult?
It was a peer.
Okay.
It was a peer. It was a friend of mine. So it was a woman who just a classmate who I'd never met before. I can remember it like it was yesterday, walking up, and she was practicing. They were doing Taekwondo, practicing their routines. And I was talking to a friend of mine, and then she turned around, and I kind of was like, "Holy shit!" Right? It was like one of those things that's right out of the 80s, like romance stories.
Totally.
So immediately fell in love. Immediately was like, "Wow, this is incredible." But what shocked me is just how much it like changed my mind, the encounter itself. And so for years that like impacted my life, trying to figure out like, why is such a drastic change? Like what could possibly happen? So when I got into philosophy, like in school, I remember my second semester, we started to learn about Dante Alighieri, and we started to read La Vita Nuova and the Divine Comedy. And in there, they talk about love and its impact its relationship to God and its impact through reciprocity. And I said, there's something in here which correlates to my experience. I don't know what it is. I don't know how. So my entire undergrad was an obsession with the Divine Comedy to try to figure out how that worked. This inevitably led me to my master's, where I did a master's on human development, human capability theory by Amartya Sen. And what I was looking to do was to figure out, okay, well, how do I operationalize this? Like, how do we operationalize reciprocity? Like, what actually changes about a person from encounter to encounter when they feel loved, and when they get a semblance of hope when they have none? Like, what is it that does it, right? Because I figured out after years later that, like, what changed me in that moment was that I felt like I was seen for the first time, genuinely seen, which gave me like a spark of hope. And I didn't understand that at the time. So it's a bit of like retrospect, trying to figure that out.
Sure.
Which, as you can probably already sense, is the reason why psychotherapy I find so powerful.
Yeah.
But it led me to the human development. And now Amartya Sen's work is from an economist's perspective. And he's looking at human capability development in terms of like societies and countries, like marginalized people. I took it to try to figure it out on an individual to individual basis, which later led me to becoming a therapist. I tried being a life coach for a little while, and there was something about it that wasn't sticking for me. And then the mental health is where I realized years later, like, that's it.
Yeah.
It's a full human experience, which led me to eventually become a psychotherapist.
Oh, dude, there's just so much that I want to ask you about. All that's so beautiful and powerful. Thank you for sharing that part of your story. I love when guests can kind of do that, and then hopefully we can maybe like even bring some theory into it. Like, this is great. I wonder, I mean, one of the things that's coming up for me is in terms of like your psychology program and just like the therapeutic side of things for a moment, what have been some of the resources, thinkers, ideas that have like energized you? And I'm also cognizant that you said you weren't that interested in some of the stuff you were reading, that you went back and like read other stuff, like more in philosophy. But like, I know at some point, I can't remember which interview you did, but you talked about Carl Rogers, who I know is really foundational for like modern psychotherapy. Yeah. Where did you find yourself gravitating toward in terms of like theory when it comes to psychotherapy?
Yeah. So at first, where I was bored was I don't know if you want to call it the scientification of human experience or scientism, but it was
I fucking hate that shit, man.
It was, the first course was like biopsychosocial is what it was.
Yeah.
And you're
I
dealing
remember
a
that
lot
course.
with like the mechanics, right? Like, this is how the brain works, this is this. And now years later as a therapist, I can use that. And I'm like, okay, cool. So if we're talking about like defense mechanisms, okay, we're in the limbic system.
Sure.
Right? You can connect it. But at the time I was like, what the fuck is this? It's so dry. It's so boring.
Dry, mechanical.
So that's kind of what made me go, okay, well, I remember how passionate I was about philosophy. I had put those books down years ago. Let's see if I can spark some life into myself while I'm trying to get through this one semester, right? And so with Whitehead, what kind of like led me eventually to Rogers, because Rogers, narrative therapy, those are the two that I kind of grabbed onto.
Okay,
eventually.
I love narrative therapy.
Like Michael White, amazing. So
yeah.
what led me there was Whitehead was my first encounter of anything related to process philosophy. I didn't know process was a thing to think about.
Okay.
At all. Process, flow. I'm using some Deleuzian terms here. Like, I had no clue that process was something you think about, in terms of like, because what I studied, my upbringing in philosophy was basically pre-Socratics to Hegel.
Got you.
That's it. We had like smatterings of Nietzsche, just a little bit. I had one course on Nietzsche and I didn't like the professor because of some things he said about Nietzsche. And I was like, that can't be right. And then I never paid attention again until Whitehead when it came to process. So then I started to think about, okay, well, there's something that happens in between. Like when you're working with a client, there's something that happens in between the insight or in between the change. I don't know what that is, but that has to be something because we all have those experiences. There has to be something there, which led me to Deleuze, which then led me to Carl Rogers. because by the time I got to my second semester, we were dealing with like theory. Okay, so here's the different thinkers. We went from Freud all the way through. And Carl Rogers struck me because he lets the people be people, basically.
Yeah.
That was the thing about him, is like, I don't have to, because I was recoiling at the idea of like telling people how to live their lives. There's something about it that I was like, that doesn't, if we're looking for change, that doesn't make any sense. But at the time, I didn't know why it didn't make sense. It was just more of like an intuition.
Sure.
But with Carl Rogers, he lets people be people. Like, he is the psychoanalyst that uses empathy pure, right? So his whole job, and I broke it down into like 3 elements, but his whole job is to reflect back so you can see yourself in terms of like the theme. So what is the themes that are going on? Emotion, right? Feelings and emotions. So you can see that. And with men, like, this is the part that we play a lot of the times, is getting to know the feelings.
Yes.
But then third is the meaning. Like, what is the meaning that I'm hearing from this? Is that lining up? So his way of reflecting caught me, because I guess in like, if we think about Martin Buber, it really allows you to have that like I-thou relationship where you're actually in it with people.
Yeah.
Right. And you're not hiding, which is another thing I thought was really important, you know, as a therapist, is to never hide, just be very real and in the moment. But I didn't know how to do that until Rogers. So then I read everything Rogers had. I watched every video available. I really tried to like own that space. And then that led me to narrative therapy. Because obviously with Deleuze, you eventually meet Foucault and all these people. And I was like, oh, okay, so somebody has operationalized Foucault. So then I started paying attention to narrative therapy. And I thought that was really cool with the narrative side and the stories that we tell each other. So that's the areas that I gravitated towards. And then as far as like my practice, it's like a mishmash. It's very client-centered, but the underlying foundation is letting people be people.
Yeah.
Doing my best to try to be in the trenches with them while not telling them how to live their life is kind of like where I go. And that's to spark that growth, which is where the theory comes in with like Nietzsche and Deleuze and stuff.
Sure. Oh, Chuck, man, you're getting me excited. There's so much I want to ask you about, but I guess let me just start with this. And in a moment, I want to go back to Carl Rogers, but so I recently reflected on one of my blogs that one of the common things I experience when I see men, and I like, it sounds like you, I primarily see men. I have some female and trans clients, but I do kind of, I don't like the word specialized, but I do see a lot of men. And many of them, not all, come in, and at the end of every session, they're like, at least the first time I see them, they're like, okay, now tell me what to do. What do I need to do? Now, there's a part of me that doesn't actually believe they want that, right? But how do you navigate practically that kind of question when someone comes to you and basically wants you to do the very thing that you just told me you don't do?
Yeah, how do I put that? Well, with my clients, I'm very direct. Like, as a therapist, I don't like the idea of hiding. So when I mean, like, if something's in my head, I'll say it. Because I guess this goes back to all the theory we can unpack. To me, therapy is like a very special environment where there's like non-judgmental, all that stuff that we say, but it's a very vulnerable environment.
Very vulnerable.
And with a lot of the men that I see, they're like rural area men, like farmers, like all this kind of stuff. And so it's very like John Wayne type people. And so the way I navigate a lot of these conversations is to just be real with them. So like, if somebody's asking me, okay, what do I do? I'll ask them like, you know, what part of you is looking for help here? You know, like, okay, so are you freaked out over what's going on? And you're like, please help me, or something like that. You know, I'll reflect back how I'm seeing it from them. And sometimes it's like, can you give me advice about this? And I was like, well, let's break it down. Maybe I can, maybe I can't, right? But a lot of the work is the experience, like just the experience. So like, if somebody's uncomfortable, then I'm uncomfortable because we're human. So that I can talk about it. You know, if they're asking me like, what can I do? And they're being timid, I can just say, well, it sounds like this is a really big problem for you and you're afraid of it. And they'll always say, it's super fun. They're just like, how do you know that? I'm like, well, I can feel it in my guts. I'm a little freaked out by it too, which means like, I want to know what problem I'm about to face here if I'm going to help you. So can we break it down? So it's kind of like getting to the human level and not being mystical about it, not being like obtuse. Just let's get right into it, right? And sometimes the advice is like, well, what am I supposed to do when I'm having a panic attack? It's like, well, what normally works? Can we find those unique outcomes? Okay, do that. You know, like mow the lawn, grab a paper bag, listen to music. Like, let's figure out those moments where it actually works, and we'll flex those muscles and see what we can do with that. So that's kind of how I navigate it.
Yeah, no, man, I really like that. When you said unique outcomes, I know in some ways that's from like narrative therapy. Did you ever get into solution focus, brief therapy?
We had to. So
Okay.
solution focus, CBT, that kind of stuff we had to do. Solution focus, I mean, all of them I didn't like. I'll just be very like real about that.
Sure.
But one of the things I did like about solution focus is that it focuses on the strengths in the sense that you highlight them.
I think that's
like
the piece that I enjoy. Yeah.
because those are muscles you don't know to flex when you're in the middle of like fighting off the bear, or so to speak.
Sure.
You're just
Well,
looking to run.
no, dude, totally. And again, yeah, there's so many problems with solution focused therapy and it yeah, it rubbed me the wrong way, but maybe it's a type of challenge because I can actually be quite negative and cynical and I tend to overemphasize the negative in my own life. I think it helped me to realize that at some moments with certain people in some ways trying to not diminish the negative but also realize that there's this potential positive that already is happening is at least therapeutically beneficial in some instances.
Definitely, because it's like a muscle, right?
Yes.
One of the ways that I look at it, well, your episode, I think it was 2 episodes ago, it was a Dr. David, Perspectival Truth.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Oh, Devin, I think.
Devin.
Yeah.
Dr. Devin, yeah. The left Nietzsche on Twitter.
Yeah. Great guy.
The perspective truth in Nietzsche is kind of like, that's my favorite part of Nietzsche. There's so many pieces into it. But when you're looking at it, when you're meeting a client, you want to understand their perspective. That's why therapists ask so many damn questions. Right?
That's why we ask so many fucking questions.
We just want to know how you built the lens in which you're looking at the world so that we can see it as closely as you can. And when you can do that, just like you said, then you can start to see like, okay, so there's a cynical negative lens here. Okay, cool. Don't judge that because it's not to be judged if it's being used. It's just a part of that perspective. Okay, cool. So what are we missing? Like, is the optimistic, is being able to see like the positives, is that missing? Now, what I love is like, okay, well, that must be missing for a reason. Sometimes it's for like a direct reason. Sometimes it's just muscle work, right? You spend your entire life thinking negatively, cup half full, all that kind of stuff. Then your whole body is going to be geared towards that perspective.
Yeah.
So the other muscles that can do the opposite are just not going to be built. So what would happen if we start to build the other muscles, not to replace the tool, but to add them to see, kind of like with drives, right? It's kind of like get the other drives to be a little bit louder.
Sure.
And then we can see how the manifold shifts. How does the lens shift? That's my favorite part of this stuff, is to figure out like what's the gaps. Because usually in the problem, we find the gaps. And it's not like, I don't know about your practice, but very rarely do I see a problem somebody comes in with and we're like, yep, you're fucked up, right? It's like, no, all of these things that are happening, there's a very like, you built it.
Yeah.
You know, like even panic attacks, like it's all, there's purpose behind this stuff. Otherwise it wouldn't be there. Can we figure out that purpose? Can we figure out the worldview that's feeding it? And is there anything else that we're missing? Like, is this a symptom of a misplaced habit? Is that what's going on? Like, what's happening here? And it's so different for everyone that it makes like the therapy so challenging and exciting.
Yes. No, that's so good. Okay, so one of the quotes that I love, and I feel bad because I cannot for the life of me find where he said it. And so it's almost like people have to like trust me that he actually said it, which I don't expect anyone to actually do. One day I'm going to find where it's at. I wrote it down, or I never wrote it down, but I'm going with, I know he said this. One of my favorites, James Hillman, student of Carl Jung and like the architect of this thing called archetypal psychology. He once said that, every first session with like a new client, he almost had this moment of like, oh fuck, I don't know where this is going. But it wasn't really like because he didn't have experience or didn't know. I mean, he was kind of a master in some ways. I think he was really in touch with what you've been talking about, letting people be people, that they are these unfolding mysteries and they're radically open. And I think for any therapist to assume that there's just one issue that they're going to solve, or that the presenting problem the client comes in that's really the issue, is so not the case often. That I just love this idea of like a therapist coming into this first encounter and then not having a panic attack, but almost sensing, yeah, we're walking into the unknown. Like we don't know where we're going. And there, to me, that's scary, but it's also exciting.
Mm-hmm. Imagine the privilege being able to do that every day.
Yeah.
Like to me, it's wild being able to walk into another person's world like that.
Yeah.
The first sessions are always my favorite because they're so terrifying.
I know.
You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what people are bringing in. And you get to find out a lot about yourself, right? Because there's certain presenting problems that you can like see right away. I mean, you always know because of the intakes.
Sure.
But you can see their physical manifestations. Like let's say depression, right? So depression, that hits me hard when people are entirely defeated.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I open like the Doxy call, right? And I'm seeing people, because I see people virtually or over the phone, and you can just see it or hear it, immediately my brain goes like, oh fuck.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
We're
real.
into it now. Yeah, exactly. But it's amazing to even be able to do that.
Oh, dude, totally. Yeah, and I love that you said it's a great privilege. I hope this doesn't sound too cheesy, but I try. I mean, in the first session, really any session, because I really am like a relational therapist, and I try to have as good of a relationship with my clients as I can. I try to always thank them for not just their time and their commitment, but just their vulnerability and for like basically letting me into their story, which is such a vulnerable thing to do. Mm-hmm. And I think again, it's not like any kind of manipulative thing, but I think that means a lot to them that they experience me acknowledging how difficult it is to kind of go on this journey.
Yeah, definitely. Because like, I mean, that to me, that's one thing that should never be taken for granted as
right.
a therapist, right? Because to even, I mean, I say this a lot, but to even make the call to book an appointment takes a lot of guts.
Absolutely.
A lot of guts to ask for help like that, and a lot of guts to show up, right? So a therapist should have quite a bit of respect for everyone they first meet because they did the work to get in the door.
Yeah.
And it's not an easy thing.
No, it's not. No, I couldn't agree more. So Chuck, I want to go back for a moment, kind of theoretically, but then also looking at it practically to Carl Rogers. And, I think anybody who's been through like a counseling program will at least have learned, what they call the core conditions of psychotherapy. He talked about unconditional positive regard, empathy, and then, authenticity or congruence. I was hoping for you to maybe riff on those three kind of in the way that you understand them, in the way that you make sense of them, even kind of philosophically and in your practice. Because I'd love to see if there's any connections with the way I kind of think about them.
Yeah. So, you have the non-judgmental space, I think, is the most important. And it's also, to me, the most misunderstood, like when you're a novice therapist.
Yeah.
So I remember before I saw my first client, like I was like geared up, like just let's get this done. We got this. I've just gone through a program for 2 years. Like I know what's going on. And then when I got in there, I was like, get me out of here. I have no idea what I'm doing.
Yeah, what the
I'm
fuck?
going to screw this person up. And so like when I was thinking about like setting up the space, right? I was like, okay, non-judgment. Okay, great. So I'm just going to not judge a damn thing. I'm just going to keep it neutral. First mistake. Right? It's not neutral. That's not what this is about. Right? And then when you go to empathy, it's like, okay, well, I'm gonna be able to feel what they feel. It's a bit too naive. And then congruence, like I'm gonna be as authentic as possible. That's extremely difficult. But I had no idea. I walked in, right. I read the books, right?
Yeah, I've got this.
And then I walk in, and the person walks in, and I was like, they start to talk. And I'm thinking, why are you doing that? What's happening here? All these thoughts start showing up. So I'm judging like left, right, and center.
Oh yeah.
Right. And I'm not saying anything, which means I'm not being authentic. I'm just saying things like, tell me more about that. But in my head, I'm like having a wrestling match.
Yeah.
Right?
Why the fuck are you doing that?
Just go left instead of right. What's wrong, right? And after I was thinking of it, I was like, what happened? And I had my supervision, and it turns out that there was a significant amount of work that I hadn't done myself. Right. And plus my nerves.
Totally.
Right. Like all of these things were showing up. But years later, all of those pieces now make more sense now that I've like taken the hits, like been in the ring, so to speak.
Yeah.
Because to me, his concepts, like non-judgment, let's just start there. His concept of non-judgment is not about being neutral. It's about being compassionate, which is a word I don't use very often because I think it's overused. It's a little too flowery nowadays, but it means being able to accept that, like when the client walks in the door, their whole world walks in with them. So whatever they're going through, whatever is happening, there's like purpose behind it. Every single thing. There's purpose behind it. And the fact that if I don't like it, if I hear something and I get irritated, well, that irritation is extremely valuable, like grist for the mill. It's very valuable not to be neutral, but to feel it, to be right in there with them. And that's part of empathy. Part of empathy is creating this space where you can see like, because if I'm frustrated, odds are they are too.
Yeah.
That's why they're here. So that like gives you like the way in. So empathy is about like being able to encounter people for who they are and doing your best to get in their perspective, to like really feel it. Because it's a hard thing for them to express, especially for men. So sometimes when they're giving you a feeling, it's like a little spark. It's like something, like a flash.
Yeah.
And you got to be able to catch it. And the only way to do that is to actually give a shit. That's really, empathy to me is just actually giving a shit about how this goes and about the person in front of you.
I love that. I think they should like change that in the counseling textbooks from empathy to actually giving a shit.
Right. Cut the clinical crap and just say what it is.
Yeah.
And then you have congruence, which is like, to me, congruence is a lot about how I build my practice.
Okay. Yeah. Go there, because I think that's important. And I think it's one that's misunderstood a lot too.
Yeah,
right?
I think so too. And it's really just about being real. Like being very real and honest.
I'm so sorry, Chuck. I just want to highlight, I think that's another kind of concept that's so overused that's why I'm excited for you to kind of get into it. Like, because everyone says, yeah, I just want to be real. But what do you think you mean by that? I mean, what did Rogers mean by that?
So what Rogers meant by that is that when you're reflecting back, it's best exposed in his encounter groups. If you ever get a chance to watch the encounter groups, where he's listening to like a story, and then he'll reflect back the feeling, like it's, I'm getting the sense that you're angry. Or I can hear a lot of anger in that, right? He wouldn't put it that way. He would just take their words and bring it right back.
Sure.
I'm not very good at that part, but what I do is I'll just say that I'm hearing a lot of anger, or there's a lot of heat behind that. And then if that heat has affected me, so like if I'm getting angry, then I'll say that. I'll just tell them, right? So if I'm like, yeah, and I'm getting a little pissed off too, that's outrageous, right? So now I've connected their feeling with my own, and we're just being like real in the moment. So what real to me means is like two things. One, if you're feeling it, say it. Two, if you're thinking it, say it. Like, don't hide. As a therapist, do not hide. And two, don't play games. Like, I really don't like the idea of playing games where you're like, you're talking to a client, you're like, okay, I'm going to lead them in this direction. I'm not a fan of that. Sometimes it's called for. Sometimes you get so lost. So it's not that this is a no-go.
Yeah.
But you have to check your intention because of the power dynamics at play. Like,
I think that's key.
Huge power dynamic here. People are coming in for help. They're looking at you as the advisor.
Yeah.
What you say, they will follow. So you have to be so careful as to like, am I leading someone here, or am I hearing this and it needs to be said? Like, can we notice the difference? Which is hard to do. And I fuck this up all the time.
Sure.
But part of being real is just being authentically in the moment. So another example is like when someone's grieving. Like if someone's grieving, and grief like was the hardest emotion for me.
Yeah.
The hardest emotion. With counseling, tried to figure that one out. But one of the reasons my growth in grief was so shocking is that when I'm dealing with grief work with a client, I would grieve along with them normally I would suppress that shit like Hercules.
Yeah.
But then I would notice like tears
Mm.
and sometimes sobbing and sometimes fear. Like all of these emotions would come out, but they would come out with them, right? It's a careful thing to navigate because you don't want to take over the session.
Right.
That's like you have to be very careful with that because it's for them, not you.
That's right.
But part of being real is just the best way to explain this instead of all the kerfuffle that I just explained it with is like you're in the room with them. Don't hide. It's like two people. I always treat therapy like two people getting a coffee, getting everything out on the table and taking a look, getting into it together. The power dynamics is something that I try my best to just squish from the room, mainly because I can't live your life. That's my stance. Unless they can download me into your brain, I cannot live your life. I can't fully take your perspective. So I have to trust everything that goes on. So part of that is just being open to what happens. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, dude, that's so good. Okay, so I think one of the things that's coming up for me in light of that is, and it's actually something I wanted to not address, but kind of ask you about, regardless, is how do you navigate like therapist disclosure? And I know there's a lot of different views on that, in terms of your own kind of like vulnerability about, details of your life or particular struggles. I'm curious to see kind of where you go with that.
So barring the fact that you always want to make sure the focus is on them, so not overstepping. I think disclosure is like an important part of the process.
I do too.
Because we're human to human. So
I think it's very relational.
Exactly. And so, I mean, that's my stance on it is if it's called for, we talk about it. I don't have any problem with that at all. I never did. I always thought the stance on like absolutely no disclosure goes too far. It makes it too robotic. But it's because we're humans. It's two humans in a room dealing with a delicate situation. If that's not relational, I don't know what is.
Dude, 100%. I can't remember who said this, but what do you think about this idea that I think obviously can apply to more than just like therapists, but this one person said once, I try to only reveal my scars and not my wounds. Which to me has different layers to it. I mean, I think the way that I understood it in terms of like therapeutic disclosure was if it's something that let me just say this. I don't know that we ever get past anything fully. So I want to make that caveat. But if it's something that's like really fresh and you're really kind of still processing maybe in your own therapy or with whoever, maybe not go there. But if it's like a scar, like a type of thing that you've worked through and you've maybe processed pretty deeply, like, sure, lead with something like that in response to a client, like you just said, make it about them. But I don't know, what do you think about that distinction, even in general, like in terms of vulnerability and disclosure, not getting into the wounds, but maybe focusing on the scars?
I think that's important because the job isn't to get help from the client.
Yeah.
Right? It's just they're not there for you, you're there for them. And that's part of the power dynamic. So I'm kind of mega obsessed with that power dynamic.
Yeah.
Because I know it can change people. So it's kind of forefront of my mind all of the time. And that's why I try to be as authentic as possible, because it's human to human. You can't get over the fact that you're the therapist. People are coming to you, and that needs to be respected.
Yes.
But it can't be like an authoritarian situation. That's kind of what I'm obsessed with.
Yeah.
So when you're showing them the wounds, like if it's fresh and you're looking for help, because we're relational people, we heal together. That's kind of the type of animal we are.
Yeah.
You don't want to bring that in the sense of you have to be, I'm not going to make such a general statement. You have to make sure it's therapeutically relevant. That's really the idea.
Yeah.
So always make sure it's therapeutically relevant and not bring them into your life so that they can help you and take away from them. Although, I mean, this is an aside. I know you were dealing with Eric Fromm. What was it? Eric Fromm? It was the Vienna Circle. There's a therapist that believed in like mutual therapy.
Oh, I don't know, but that sounds like an interesting idea.
Yeah,
I'd want to learn more about that. I
yeah.
don't think it was from, but man, he's just kind of been a recent obsession. So I definitely don't feel comfortable saying that it wasn't him because I just don't know.
Yeah, I can't remember, but they talked about mutual therapy, and it was kind of like a transversal way of bridging the gap in the relationship.
Yeah,
So the
yeah,
therapist would come in with their problems, the client would come in with their problems. I can't see that working
no,
at all, but there is a theorist out there from back in like Freudian days that
interesting.
tried it. That might be worth like looking into.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna have to look into that. So, man, okay, let's go there for just. I know we have been at some level, but the whole idea of power dynamics, because I think I actually struggle with this in at least theoretically, in that I've been really influenced. You know, we talked about narrative therapy, some solution focused, but like by collaborative therapy, which is a whole nut. I mean, I think it's connected to the kind of postmodern like wing of things, but and I do a lot of work with like adolescents. So at one level, what comes out of my mouth is, you know, I'm not the authority in your life. I'm not a friend, you know, but I don't want to see myself as someone, yeah, that's going to tell you what to do, or like you said, that's going to kind of live your life, because I just don't think that's the right approach or even possible. But I also, especially if I'm working with someone who's like different than I am in terms of being kind of a minority or a different gender or a different sexuality or religion, a different socioeconomic background, I definitely sense that I have a type of privilege, or as you were pointing out, in terms of my therapeutic like status and role, yeah, a type of like expertise or a type of authority, right? That they're coming in believing is the case, right? Already. So how do we navigate the fact that we don't want to be authorities in people's lives, but we do have a type of like power? I think it's a thorny one.
It is, and I think the way I look at it is kind of like through intensity.
Okay.
So this
I
is my
like
Deleuze
this.
coming out.
Yeah.
So you cannot sever the fact that you're the therapist, right? So people are coming in, you're the therapist, you've got the training, so they're seeking help from you, right? There is power there. There's like a level of authority, but what I try to think about is like, okay, what's the level of intensity of this power? So you have to respect the fact that you're the therapist, because to deny that, like to try to level the playing field and take that out, it's disingenuous, because you've
Yeah.
got the paper, and that's why people are paying you, right? So there's
Right.
like transaction there. But I view it as a level of intensity.
Okay.
So in the sense of like when I'm telling someone how to live their life, then that dial's going up, right? Because it's like, I have power over you. I know how to live your life. You can't do this right. Do this. That's like extreme. That's authoritarian. That's
Yeah.
brutal, right? But when you're talking to someone, there's already this like scale tip of where there is a level of trust because of your credential. That's where I keep it. I do my best to keep the intensity there, because you can't get rid of it. That's part of the game, right? It's part of
Yeah.
what we're doing. So when I navigate that in the room, two places. One is it's the level of intensity. So I watch kind of just how intense I'm getting with that. So I try to keep it that way. And two, talk about it. So if it becomes a concern, or even if I overstep, which happens all the time, talk about it. So then you're always discussing the power dynamic in the room. So the two of you are aware of it. So nothing is hidden.
Yeah, dude. Okay, I mean, one of the things that I'm just picking up from you that I really like, and that I see in my own just thinking about therapy, my own practice, is just doing a lot of like reflecting on what's happening in the therapeutic relationship.
Mm.
I was privileged to just have my own like psychotherapist for several years, even before I started the kind of therapeutic training, and he was just incredible at doing that. It was very difficult to talk about like hard moments between us, and some of the negative shit that would happen, but it was such a wonderful model, and I think it served me so well, because a lot of people do end up kind of reflecting on the fact that like other therapists never just talk about the actual relationship, and I am kind of a relationally oriented therapist, so that's just really important. But I'm just really connected with how you've talked about it today. It's really cool to hear other people doing that.
Well, thanks. I mean, that's the space. Like the therapeutic room to me is like, it's almost spiritual in a sense. It's just
Yeah.
it's such a unique and powerful space. and it has to be respected. The things that go on in that room, like it's one of the most unique spaces you can get in life. Like, just imagine, I think about this all the time. Like, as one who was raised not to be vulnerable, right? It's like, imagine having a space where you can be,
Right.
right? Where the gloves can come off, right? The dam can be broken. You can cry. You can do all these things. But imagine having a space to do that. Imagining it and feeling it are two different things, right? So all of that space has to be respected, but it's because it's relational.
Yeah.
It's not the room. It's you and the client that's doing it. It's
No.
like a co-authored space.
Yeah. No, totally. I love that. Now, I guess one question that I kind of had for you was, and I'm kind of thinking about, I think I may have like a caricature. So I want you to maybe help me unpack what I think and maybe point out where it's wrong. But I kind of have this, I think, a caricature of like Rogers, that he kind of believed that, under all the shit and the years of development, all this like stuff, we have kind of this core self that is like the true self, right? So I'll frame it that way, and then I want to say, I want to bring in maybe like Nietzsche and Hillman and maybe Deleuze and Guattari and their understanding of like multiplicity, and there's probably various selves. Hillman talked about a polytheistic psychology versus a monotheistic one. I know that sounds like a lot, but I guess the question that I'm wondering and that I want some help with is, how do you honor the multiplicity of people's psychology while also acknowledging that maybe there are places to talk about a type of unity or a type of, individual self that might be important for some? Like, I know that's kind of a weird question and there's a lot there, but I'm just curious to see where you go with that.
It's not a weird one because that's the one that occupies my brain the most. Like,
okay.
Because
Me
it's
too.
such a complicated.
And me too.
Right? Like, it's such a complicated thing because for Rogers, right? Rogers, he was caught up in the movement, and I forget what influenced him, but it is a true self conversation.
Okay.
And it's probably the Christian movement back then.
Yeah.
And that kind of thing.
Sure.
So for Rogers, there's this true self. And the true self comes out when you're a kid, right? And then what happens is, over the course of being a child, you get introjections, right? Ways to be through society, through your parents, don't dance too much, don't be too loud, like all these things start to show up. Those introjections they then like transforms into the way you try to be, right? And a lot of the problems for Rogers that come out is because you're not listening to the true self, you're living according to the introjections, right? And so the job of the therapy is to get you to hear. This is why he reflects so much. This is why empathy is important. It's to hear yourself for the first time beyond the interjections, right? Which Eugene Gendlin would then take down another wild road. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Gendlin, but
dude, I feel like I am. Like, I had to read him or I've read him, but I'm not like registering it very clearly. Yeah, I mean, can you talk about that?
Yeah. So Gendlin would take it a little bit further, where he would talk about focusing. So, and we use this nowadays. Every therapist would use it, where it's kind of like, let's say you have a client come in and they don't know how they're feeling, right? They're feeling something, but they don't know how they're feeling. So then you ask them a question like, okay, so we can't identify how you're feeling, but is there something showing up in your body? Like a knot in the stomach, pain in the chest, like behind the jowls. Sometimes it's in the eyes. Like, is there something? Yeah, well, it's like in my chest. Okay, cool. What is it like? Hard, soft? Like, so we try to figure that out. And then what Gendlin does through focusing therapy is he's like, okay, so what I want you to do is close your eyes and focus on the feeling in your chest. Just focus on it and see if something comes up. So then you'd have people like put their hand on their chest or something, and then you would like focus. And then they would have a stream of consciousness of trying to like describe what's coming up. Like a bike they rode when they were 3, or the latest video game, like whatever.
Sure.
But by paying attention to this feeling, one of two things are going to happen. One, it'll come to your consciousness, oh, I'm angry. Or the feeling will go away. And then whatever they came in with is gone because they paid attention to it. Right? So Gendlin would like take that further with focusing therapy and like position it into the body, Roger's focused on the expressions of the feelings, right? So when you come in and you're like, I'm really pissed off right now, and he just reflected like, it sounds like you're really angry. When you hear that from the outside, you're like, yeah, I just said that, right? But the point was that someone was able to catch it, feel it, and hear it. So then your interjected self is like being paid attention to. And that's weird. That's vulnerable. That's odd. And then over the course of the conversation, you're basically having a conversation with yourself through Rogers and what he's doing. And he has a video where he's talking to a guy about anger, and it's amazing. It's amazing. But he's talking to the guy, and the guy's like, I feel like the guy's trying to bait Rogers into helping him. And he's like, I feel like I'm circling around this pit, and I want to just dip my toe in it, but I'm too afraid. And Rogers just kept going. Sounds like you're afraid to engage with it. You got fear about dipping your toe. You just keep going. And then the guy eventually like got angry, and then got mad, and then was like, and then broke down. His self was being communicated with for the first time, right? But that's for Rogers was all about. There's one self, and we're trying to find it, the uncovering, right? I used to buy into that a lot.
I think I did too, right? Back in the day. Yeah.
It's like, reach your potential, like be who you are, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But what I find about the postmoderns like Nietzsche, Deleuze, Guattari, I find the multiplicity or the manifold to be a far more sensible, believe it or not, now way of thinking about it, because we're not all one thing at one time, right? I'm like as authentic as I possibly can be, but you can see the differences when I'm at work than when I'm with my family. Sure. When I hang out with friends, when I'm angry, when I go to the gym, when I'm listening to music, like the different parts of you show up and come out. But you can also notice the like ripple effects of change on those parts of you as you go on, like changing goals, changing values. So our values evolve over time. These are like facts that I find undeniable. So it makes more sense that it's far more fluid than just a true self, and it's more constructed. So with Deleuze and Guattari, what I like, and Nietzsche, all of it, and like with Nietzsche, he talks about it in terms of drives. Yeah. Right. So we've got all these drives going on at the same time, and the one that you are in the moment, or the one is just the loudest one. Yeah. Right. It's like survival of the fittest in there. Whatever's allowed, right? If you and I, that's a great way to put it. If you and I are having this conversation, and I love this shit, like I could talk about this for hours, right? But if I haven't eaten in 2 days, this is going to be a short conversation. That drive is going to entirely take over because I love to eat. And so there's nothing that's going to overpower my love for eating. Or things like that, right? Sure. But, what I liked about Nietzsche is it was far more like fluid, but also far more like carnal for him. Like it's all about like affirming life. So what's being affirmed in any given moment? Yeah. Well, I'm hungry, so I'm going to eat, or I'm pissed off, so I'm going to fight, or whatever, right? I'm passionate, so now you're going to, Kike's in the midst of a Chuck rant because I really love this. I'm not going to pay attention to anything else, right? But those are the drives. And what I like about Deleuze and Guattari, and Nietzsche too, but I learned it from Deleuze and Guattari before I got to Nietzsche, because I kind of learned this stuff in reverse. I paid attention to Nietzsche after, was what happens with experience, like with the novel. So like Lines of Flight, right? I don't think if we have a concrete self, we can grow the way we do. Like we can't be sparked for growth because the foundation's already there. So whichever way we grow is already going to be within us. And then like, if it was already within us, how the hell are we growing? Right. Like, how is anything new happening? It's what's going on. But with Deleuze and Guattari, it's a manifold or a multiplicity. I like the term manifold a lot better. For me, it makes more sense, or I can visualize manifold better than multiplicity. But because when you have a new experience, it like rhizomatically affects everything. Right? So, just instance how I became a therapist. I was talking to a life coaching client. I had no idea about therapy. I hadn't seen a therapist, none of it. I didn't understand about psychology, never heard of any of it. And they were talking about their experience in psychology because they were relating it to something I'd said. And I was like, whoa, what do you mean? And so we had this huge conversation, and then I immediately applied to become a therapist, right? Not even on my radar. The situation with suicide and just meeting this woman, right? Not even on my radar. Changed me. You can notice a difference in my personality from that moment to the next.
Yeah.
It's very rhizomatic in that regard. And I like that a lot better because it gives you a lot more creativity. I think.
Yeah, no, totally. And again, I don't know if this is ever resolvable, and that's okay. And then I'm just really trying to do my own kind of like reflection on my unconscious and things that drive me. But I guess I still wonder kind of out loud for myself, for my clients. And maybe it's because I've been really influenced by like the Jungian tradition and like internal family systems theory sometimes. This concept of like, the self. Like, I love the idea of multiplicity, but is there kind of a way that it gets constellated or centered on something that's like more dominant than the others? And I want to look at you and say, I don't want to agree with that, like theoretically, but I think within my psyche, I still have maybe an obsession or whatever toward finding a type of unity. And maybe I'm just confessing to you that I don't like that, but I do it. So,
well, I'm right there with you, but
okay.
Like, listen, like, I heard a lot of my own struggles in you, so I'm going to like pull them out. So
Yeah,
this
please.
could get vulnerable for the two of us, but we're just going to go after it.
Sounds good, man. I'm down.
But as I talk about this, like, think about resentment, like ressentiment.
Yeah.
Think about like shame. I think about like fear, like death fear that comes out of wanting to have like a unity. There's so much control over being like, okay, it's one thing, perfect, right?
Right.
Like, what am I going to be when I wake up tomorrow? What am I going to be when this happens? There's this giant, like, it's very threatening to think otherwise, right?
100%.
And I know for me, that's kind of why it gives me the shakes. Sometimes when I think about it, it's like, oh, okay, wait a minute, right?
Yeah.
Where is the control here? But the control is separate from the self or the unity, because that's coming from like a threat. It's like, this is threatening to think this way. But when I think about, if I was to try to operationalize it, I think about the refrain a lot from Deleuze. And you think about it in a song, like, how do you know the identity of a song? Well, it's from the melody, right? Everybody has a song where if they hear like the first three notes, they're like, that's Freebird, or that's the Macarena, or like whatever,
Yeah.
right? But that repetition gives you the identity. But it's a repetition of like random notes, of random things, of people playing, of a style of music, of a history of music, of a culture. Like, all of these things have to come together to like sing this note. And so I kind of look at the self that shows up as like momentary unities. Like the manifold has, when I'm talking to you right here, you're getting like the passionate psychotherapist, right? I love this shit. Do I love it always? Yes, but in different ways. It looks different. Right? You can catch me on a day where I'm like, fuck all of this. Why do I even do this? None of it makes any sense, right? And so it's all these little pieces of me coming out depending on the drive that's being activated in that moment. But they do work together, right? Because something does show up, right? Because when we think of having memories, like I think about when I'm a kid, to me, it feels like a linear progression. I have all who I am now thinking of myself when I was 6. But you mentioned like independent family systems. One of the things we do with clients, I'm not sure if you've done this, but one of my favorite tools is like, if we're trying to find a core wound, like an activating wound, we'll try to go back in time to figure out where it started.
Yeah.
And as therapists, we're looking for the development of the defense mechanism, the habit to protect ourselves. But we're also trying to understand the perspective. Like, why would this need to happen? All that kind of good stuff, right? Because you built the muscles, and now at 39 years old, you're very strong in protecting yourself this way. Let's figure out when the reps started, to talk in workout speak. But when you do that, you're going to get an account of like a 6-year-old self from a 39-year-old's brain. That's the coherent refrain. So you're using your current manifold to analyze your 6-year-old manifold. But all of it is coming with you, all of the lens. So if you try to think of yourself as a 6-year-old and think about that, it's going to be damn near impossible.
Yeah.
damn near impossible because it's not your current present lens. That's, to me, like philosophically fascinating because it's like, okay, well, is it just that I've been the same since I was 6 so I can see it at the same lens? Well, we know that not to be true. We grow and we experience and we do all these things. But no, I can only see it through my current vibration, my current lens. I said vibration because I was reading, was it Berkeley today? So just take that part. But
nice.
Yeah, so it's kind of like, if we look at it like that, it makes the coherent self and the manifold kind of make a lot more sense to me anyway.
Yeah. Oh, dude, I really like it. You know, one of the things that I'm thinking of is I think it was my therapist that used to say when and he, you know, he was like the director of like the Jung Center, so he was committed to that tradition. But you know, he also loved James Hillman and had met him and knew him, and he said, you know, when I'm feeling like my life is falling apart and everything is chaotic, I read Jung because I want a sense of like stability or direction. But when I'm like bored and, you know, everything seems like rigid and fixed in my life, I'll read Hillman because I want things to just completely be shaken up. And so I thought that's an interesting kind of dynamic there. And that kind of resonates with me in terms of this core struggle of like multiplicity and unity. And
yeah, I think unity is safety. And it's not a bad thing.
Right.
As we all know, like don't judge these things. We need it. If it's coming up, we need it, right? And I think
we both work with clients at times. It's like they almost need the safety and the unity.
That's right.
To live another day, you know.
Which makes it like a really important tool and lens.
Right. But one lens, right?
Exactly. Not the only one. And that comes into the, like, obviously perspectival truth and things like that, but it's just one lens. Because if you're, and actually you're bringing up a good point. I think that's the beauty of it, is that we can, like, we're so multifaceted. We're multifaceted creatures that we can like put the parachute on when we need it, right? Shields up and then take it off when we're looking to cliff dive. And then like we can do all of these things,
dude,
at will.
Yeah, man, humans are quite phenomenal. It's incredible.
Yeah. Remarkable creatures.
Yeah. Okay, I know that in a minute I have to kind of like sign off, but before I do that, well, first of all, Craig, this has been fucking amazing. I hope that we can like do it again. But is there anything else that you felt like you wanted to share? I'll definitely include like the link to your practice in the show notes. Yeah, any kind of final thoughts before we sign off?
I guess my main one is it's like great to finally meet you and have this conversation, because it's few and far between that I meet like another therapist doing the same work with the same philosophical interests, and we can just like, riffing is my favorite thing. I do not come like, whether I do a speech in front of people or anything, I do not come prepared.
Yeah, I'm the same way.
That riff. And I feel like we could talk for hours about this stuff, because especially with the self, right? Multiplicity in the self. We deal with this every day.
Absolutely.
8 hours a day, Monday to Friday. Like, and not only is that a privilege and it's super cool, but it's also like terrifying and exciting at the same time. To me, it's always like riding that wave or just kind of walking that fine balance. It's terrifying, but it's also so fucking exciting and interesting. Okay, well, Chuck, we'll definitely have you back on. And yeah, I just hope you have a great rest of your day and an awesome weekend. And I look forward to continuing this conversation. Awesome. Well, great to meet you, and we'll see you again.
Okay.